corrupt millionaire humiliates and accuses an integrity judge because she is black. But Clarice Beaufort was born in a working-class neighborhood, a place where opportunities seemed reserved for those who had the means to seize them. The only daughter of a taxi driver father and a nurse mother, she grew up with the firm conviction that one had to fight for every advance, every moment of recognition. The gaze of others, full of prejudice, followed her everywhere. As a child, she remembers the murmurs in the street, the disdainful looks from her school friends' children when they learned that she came from a modest background. But young Clarice was not the type to let herself be destabilized. On the contrary, these experiences strengthened his resolve. She knew that to succeed, you had to be more than excellent. You had to be impeccable. From her first years at law school, she encountered racial and sexist stereotypes. Her teachers, mostly white men, often had lowered expectations for her. A black woman, in such a prestigious field? She won't last, said some, not without a certain amusement. However, Clarice ignored these remarks, absorbing each piece of knowledge with a devouring fervor. She gave it her all, not only to prove her peers wrong, but also to prove to her community that you could dream big, even when everything seemed to bring you down. Her first internships in law firms confront her with a world of elites, of tacit rules where ascension is only achieved through connivance, relationships, and often to the detriment of principles.
Clarice stands out.
Her superiors judge her to be both too serious and too ethical, a quality they find embarrassing. However, she stands out for her relentless arguments and analytical mind, tackling complex cases of corruption in influential companies. These first victories in the courts where she pleaded, with the ardor of an activist, gradually propelled her forward. But every promotion, every victory in the courtroom is accompanied by muted resistance, a silent and sometimes brutal challenge. It is often whispered to her that her career could have gone much faster if she had not insisted on playing big. His rise to the post of chief judge of the state appeals court, although deserved, only fuels resentment. This summit is the result of more than 20 years of hard work, countless personal sacrifices, and unwavering determination. But this position is not well received by everyone. Many in the justice system see a black woman in this role as an anomaly. Some are amused, others are irritated. His authority and his approach to justice are perceived as threats. Where other judges play by the unwritten rules, Clarice refuses to ignore the truth, even if it means upsetting the powerful. Victor Langlois, an influential businessman in the construction sector, is one of those powerful people who has learned to game the system, exploit it, and wrap it around his little finger. Langlois built his fortune through government contracts and questionable practices, taking advantage of flaws in the public system to line his pockets. But with Clarice at the head of the Court of Appeal, her days of free movement seem numbered. She has already launched investigations into his practices, and it is only a matter of time before he finds himself facing justice for his embezzlement. Langlois hates everything she represents: her ethics, her intelligence, her power. More than anything, he hates her because she represents an obstacle to his omnipotence. So he hatches a plan to humiliate her, to silence her, to keep her away from his business. At a charity gala organized by a local politician, a friend of Langlois, he sees a perfect opportunity to execute his maneuver. The place is magnificent, a real palace decorated with crystal chandeliers and marble columns that rise towards a black velvet sky. The red carpet leads to a grand reception room, where guests adorned in elegant suits and sumptuous gowns stroll between satin-covered tables, their laughter echoing in the air like shards of glass. Clarice enters alone, her walk calm but assured, a simple black dress which does not seek to compete with the splendor around her. She is a woman of principle, not prestige. Far from the light and glamour of the evening, she is there on a mission. She must meet certain political contacts and discuss future judicial reforms. But Langlois spots her as soon as she enters. His cold gaze slides over her, and he feels the strange frustration he's always felt toward those who dare challenge his power. He sees her isolated in this elite crowd, and in his mind, a Machiavellian plan begins to form. It's time to remind him who really controls the rules here, he said to himself. In the middle of the evening, while the conversations died down and the attention of the room focused on a speech of little importance, Langlois stood up and, in a deliberately strong tone, remarked,
This is the famous Justice Beaufort.
She was appointed in large part to represent the diversity of government. But is that really what we need in justice? Someone truly competent, or just someone who fits a model?
The whispers begin to spread.
Some laugh nervously, others exchange meaningful glances, and a few mutter words of discomfort. Clarisse, however, does not flinch. She remains there, standing, her imposing figure contrasting with the petty laughter spreading around her. It is in these moments of public vulnerability that Clarisse's true strength is revealed. She remains silent for a moment, and then, with implacable calm, she responds in a measured but strong voice. Victor, I was never appointed based on the color of my skin or my gender, but because of my qualifications, my hard work and my determination to do justice. And everything you just said, all this attempted manipulation, is what has always allowed me to see exactly who you are. The room falls into a heavy silence, but Langlois is not the type to let himself be embarrassed. He tries to add a few acidic words, but Clarisse is no longer there to discuss. She knows that he has just put her on the line in a bigger fight, one that she is more than ready to fight. A few hours after the gala incident, the tension in the room has not dissipated. Conversations around the glass of champagne, once light and worldly, have become weighed down by worried murmurs. A rumor was now circulating, more dangerous than all social speculation. The gold watch set with diamonds of Thierry, one of Langlois' associates, had disappeared. Suspicious looks then turned towards the guests closest to the missing object, in particular those who had had direct exchanges with Thierry during the evening. Theft seemed to be the quickest explanation, and as is often the case in this type of situation, anxiety turns into blind accusation. Thierry, a nervous man with a thin figure and a constantly worried look, rushes towards Langlois with a distracted air, agitated by the idea of losing his precious possession. The worry in his eyes turns to panic, a contagious panic that quickly spreads among the guests. But in this moment of chaos, Langlois perceives a golden opportunity to definitively shatter Clarisse's image. He knows that the judge, although respected, is vulnerable to public opinion. He also knows that, if this accusation were associated with her, it could be enough to bury any investigation into her, even if it is false. With Machiavellian calm, Langlois approaches Clarisse, like a predator preparing to strike, and in a sharp, almost theatrical voice, he declares, "She may be there to deliver justice, but she is not above suspicion. You see, this watch, just lost, could well have ended up in someone's hands. And there is something strange about her, something that I have always felt. She has this look that hides many things. Maybe justice is not what interests her that much."
The murmurs in the room grew louder.
All eyes turn, not towards Thierry, whose expression full of guilt would make anyone doubt, but towards Clarisse. Langlois, as clever as a strategist, planted doubt in the minds of the guests. For him, it's not just about accusing him. Clarisse, even under the appearance of dignity, must be touched, her image must be tarnished, her colleagues and the public must begin to look at her with implicit doubt. Clarisse does not respond immediately. She takes a moment, not to think, but to assess the situation. His calm is a shield. She has experienced worse, much worse, in her career. The racist accusations, the sexist innuendos, the attempts at destabilization, all of this had been part of her daily life since she began to fight for her place in this judicial system where the rules of the game were always biased. But this time it was different. Langlois doesn't just attack him head-on, he tries to lead him into a social trap where the victim becomes the culprit, where suspicion is the only thing left in people's minds. She finally responds in a tone of icy coldness, her gaze never leaving Langlois's. "I didn't take any watches and I didn't steal from anyone, Victor. But what you did tonight is what really shows us who you are. It's not your accusations that smear me, it's your intentions." Langlois, surprised by the firmness of his response, tries to maintain the pressure, but he is now caught in a duel of glances that Clarisse completely controls. The room, however, is no longer as united as before. Some guests, driven by the feeling of having to conform to Langlois' authority, avoid taking a position. But in their eyes, Clarice can see embarrassment, uncertainty, and, sometimes, shame. They all know that something is wrong, that this accusation is unfounded, but just witnessing this scene is enough to erode his image a little more. These are micro-movements which, in the long term, will have consequences. As the hours pass, the rumors become facts. Thierry, in his growing panic, begins to claim that he saw Clarice approaching him in the crowd at some point in the evening. Although no one saw this interaction, his testimony becomes the cornerstone of the prosecution. Langlois, seeing that uncertainty is taking root, accelerates the manipulation. He lines up a series of vague witnesses, often respected but easily manipulated figures, who begin to tell versions of the event that corroborate, in a strange way, Thierry's story. Each of these witnesses seems more concerned with preserving their own status than with the truth, and the pressure is starting to build. But Langlois makes a crucial mistake. By pushing the matter, he underestimates Clarice. Because, behind her icy eyes and her silence, Clarice knows that she is not alone in this struggle. She worked for months on the links between Langlois and his companies, on the flaws in the system he exploits, and on the damning evidence that exists about his embezzlement. She is not without resources. Each piece of this case, each accusation against her, becomes an opportunity to act more strategically. She knows that her role as chief judge of the appeals court protects her, at least on the surface. But it was in the shadows that she made her preparations, collecting evidence and testimonies clandestinely. Clarice is not a victim in this story. She is a silent but implacable adversary, waiting for the right moment to strike where Langlois least expects it. What he doesn't know is that beyond the false witnesses and media manipulations, Clarice is building a case that will be impossible to discredit. The time will come, and it will be too late for him. A few days after the gala, while Victor Langlois, confident of himself and convinced of having succeeded, is enjoying his victory, a radical change is being prepared behind the scenes. He is not aware that Judge Clarice Beaufort, to whom he thought he had inflicted irreparable humiliation, had for her part prepared a response that he did not see coming. The shadow of justice that weaves around him grows tighter as she develops a careful plan, fueled by her secret research and observation of the flaws in Langlois' financial empire. When the summons comes, Langlois goes there, perhaps thinking that it is simply a last opportunity to manipulate the situation in his favor. But the surprise is total when he discovers that this time, it is he who is called to answer for his actions. It is not in the context of a formal accusation, but in a hearing which quickly turns into a trial without return. Clarice enters the courtroom, her black dress flowing behind her with unwavering authority.
Silence falso verde assembly.
At this moment, Langlois understands that the roles have changed, that the game in which he thought he had triumphed is no longer his. Clarice stares at him for a moment, a piercing gaze, before declaring in a deep voice, worthy of her position. Victor Langlois, you are officially indicted for corruption, embezzlement of public funds and false testimony. The effect is immediate. A murmur of disbelief runs through the room. Langlois, petrified, tries to hide his surprise with a nervous smile, but it is too late. Clarice has launched her coup de grace, and the outcome is now inevitable. The witnesses, now lined up behind Clarice, confirm what the public was previously unaware of. The Langlois empire is nothing more than a shiny facade built on soil rotten by injustice and manipulation. In the days that followed, the silence of the authorities gave way to the brilliance of the revelations. Clarice reveals a file of unsuspected magnitude. Every document, every piece of evidence is a piece of the corruption puzzle she has patiently assembled. Public contracts awarded fraudulently, funds diverted under the cover of philanthropic projects that never saw the light of day, business relationships between Langlois and crooked politicians who allowed his empire to prosper in the shadow of public institutions. These agreements, hidden behind speeches of benevolence and donations to social causes, turn out to be nothing more than lures intended to maintain an illusion of philanthropy while extracting public money to line the pockets of Langlois and his accomplices. Clarice not only lays out the evidence precisely, she also makes it heard in a strong and commanding voice. She refuses to let herself be overwhelmed by the maneuvers of Langlois, who, in a last desperate act, attempts to destroy her reputation with insinuations and false accusations. But nothing he says can taint Clarice's integrity. His years of experience in the justice system have taught him to resist pressure, to discern truth from lies, and to see beyond appearances. When the verdict finally falls, the room freezes. Langlois is sentenced to several years in prison for his financial crimes, but beyond this conviction, it is the fall of his empire which has the effect of a thunderclap. His property was seized, his businesses were placed under receivership, and, in the weeks that followed, many of Langlois' associates were arrested for their role in this corruption network. His name, once synonymous with power and respect, became a symbol of the moral bankruptcy of the system he represented. But for Clarice, it is not a personal victory. She knows that the real work has only just begun. Despite the applause and congratulations of her colleagues, Clarice retreats into the silence of her office. She remains faithful to her principles, but she does not get carried away by the euphoria of the moment. Every step of this battle has been painful. Every moment of doubt, every personal attack, every public humiliation she suffered has shaped her, but she never forgets why she undertook this mission. She did not act for revenge, but to deliver justice, to ensure that those who think they can buy the truth are held accountable for their actions. Clarice, although exhausted, now carries a much heavier burden than the one she had before. Because, although she brought down Langlois, she knows that others, like him, are ready to take his place. This victory, although symbolic, is a step towards a much larger fight. She looks out the window of her office, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The work is never done, she thinks. And she prepares to continue her fight. Because in a world where prejudice and corruption are omnipresent, there is no end to the quest for justice. There are only battles to be fought, with honor and dignity.